things is what's probably the most fascinating, because what we're doing is we're actually moving towards redefining what, again, in the old legal term, we'd call it a chose, a thing. It's a term used in French. So you normally say your legal rule is against typically a person, but here what we're actually now starting to do is we're creating new rules which are much more focused on the thing.
George, here we are. Very nice to speak and meet you only for the second time in your very nice office. Today we're going to be speaking, of course, about compliance for businesses, for founders, entrepreneurs, and perhaps this will be useful content for some advisors as well, who will learn from your experience. Before we begin, I'd love you to give a 2-minute background and explain to us how you landed from, working as I guess I would call you a specialized lawyer, with employment and labor being your specialties, with many years of experience in big law, and you also ran your own practice. How do you go from that world, if I can put it this way, to the world of Web3 and crypto?
Well, thanks, Flo, for sitting down with me. And what I'm going to say is the path that I followed is very similar to many, whether it be in the legal world, the business world, or the technical world. And I think the hourglass is a bit of a way to describe it. Early on, we learn different things. We have a wide range of tasks we might do, ideas we're interested in, and what we're exposed to. So in my case, originally I had a background in journalism, realized that people who are making lots of these decisions and wanted to know more about how things worked, the legal world was what drew me to sort of the next phase and becoming a little more narrow in my area of inquiry. And then becoming somebody who was working in the business law setting, but with a specialty in the workplace. That was partly just because I realized I like dealing with people. And that work really drew me to that. Fortunately, I've been able to work in a few different cities over the years. I started out working in Vancouver, spent a few years working in the UK and London, England, and then have been in Toronto for about 20 years. And again, during that time, that's where the hourglass has started to become the changing again of that more narrow focus of being sort of a recognized, ranked expert in the management side of labor and employment law. And then I've extended my scope out as I've worked with different organizations, especially in the technology sector. And in a way, it's come full circle because, my favorite course of all time was grade 12 computer science when we're working on, 8K machines and we're using these very, very rudimentary technologies. So you had to really analyze the problem and learn how it worked. And you had to partner with people who had different technical skill set and expertise, and you bring your own skills to that. So that's how I kind of migrated to doing something a little bit different and perhaps a bit non-traditional. So
the seed was actually planted in your younger years, but now a little bit later in life, you are actually really kind of honing in on the Web3 space and on blockchain. And if you won't mind me saying that lawyers, I think, deal with problems that their clients are having and trying to help them resolve them through the judicial, pathways. What are the main problems that you think Web3 companies, whether they're startups or a little bit more advanced, are facing today in Canada, as I imagine they do elsewhere?
Sure. So I agree that, we're supposed to be problem solvers, whether we're lawyers, whether we're technologists, whether we're business people. What I sometimes say to start is, I just work here, right? We have to make sure that we are trying to give people ideas to solve the problem. We don't necessarily own the one who implements that solution. So it's very important just in terms of when we're working with people. Same thing for a technical person. If you give them a technical solution, they say, this is great, but the UX doesn't work, or it's not compatible, or there may be other reasons. So sometimes we need to stay in our lane and say, what I'm doing is I'm giving you advice, I'm giving you experience, I'm giving you recommendations, but it's not me that's actually the one implementing that solution. So that's the first thing to say.
Okay.
Then in terms of those problems, you say, the mistake many people make is they will say, I need to know how do I not be in court, or how do I save costs on this, or what's the most specific result or outcome, or what can we do, or what's the value of something. And I think it's important to start by just understanding what are legal rules and legal systems all about. And fundamentally, they're about relationships, right? The law is just a relationship business. The law is saying you have people, places, and things, and we just know what those relationships are. So then when you migrate into talking about Web3 or emerging businesses, it gets a little bit easier, okay? Who are the people who are involved? What relationship do they have between them? Places, a little bit less obvious when you're dealing with, digital solutions,
right.
But again, you'll start saying, all right, so Where is there scope for there being legal application? Where maybe there be a dispute? If there is a dispute, where is it heard? So you
The
have
context.
You have a context exactly
Yeah.
for that. And then things is what's probably the most fascinating, because what we're doing is we're actually moving towards redefining what, again, in the old legal term, we'd call it a chose, a thing. It's a term used in French. So you normally say your legal rule is against typically a person. But here, what we're actually now starting to do is we're creating new rules which are much more focused on the thing. So it's actually not just property, right? So it's not just a physical piece of real estate or, a physical, coin, for lack of a better term. We're now dealing with, we're actually creating parameters of what that thing is. So many of the biggest disputes that we see are partly because people haven't yet delineated what those rights are that are associated with either the business that we're talking about, the project that people are working on, the piece of commerce they're doing, or that thing. What are you actually getting and what are those associated rights? So the reason I think it's so exciting is all of that is open for discussion, development, new ideas. We haven't done it before.
It's also not regulated often, and I'm sure we'll get to that in just a moment. So what would you say are some of the main problems that Web3 entrepreneurs face? What are the things that you just come across time and time again, that almost every entrepreneur just gets wrong, basically? Because that's what we want to address here, right?
Sure. So I mean,
What are the categories?
Well, categories are good. So first, there's a default set of challenges that every ambitious person has in any endeavor, and that is that there's sort of this all hat no horse problem, right? So they're all really great and energetic and enthusiastic, and that's admirable. We need more of that in this world. But they don't necessarily have the execution, right? They always think, tomorrow is going to be a productive day. And we all have those challenges, but sometimes the people who are the disruptors are the people who are more likely to be prone to that. So sometimes what happens, working with advisors, is to help them just bring a little bit of routine and regularity to their thinking, bring a bit of focus to what they're doing.
Right. That's
a persistent problem with many people in emerging businesses. Now, Web3 in particular, we also have a really, it's not just that it's changing rapidly, it's this speed of the acceleration. So in other words, the speed at which the speed is changing is even
exponential
greater.
growth.
Exactly. And so there we have a lot of challenges of people being able to keep up with the market. So being able to have a solution that's actually, if you can develop, you can commercialize, and you can get it widely adopted, and that's difficult. And so many of the people might have the technical skill set to do it, but they don't necessarily have the experience or the network or the wherewithal to make it actually happen.
It's interesting because instead of categories, you're actually kind of talking about an attitude, basically, or something that is inherently more human. That people, the way they approach business, basically. And I can certainly relate to a lot of what you said about the enthusiasm versus, maybe the planning.
Yeah, and some of that, it's like a mindset, right? Some people have called it this ready, fire, aim mindset. And that's certainly, many of the most successful entrepreneurs, they don't say, I need a 30-page business plan and, this many million of funding before I get started, right? So one of the biggest things people have to get over is, this imposter syndrome that can happen. You say, well, there's no way, I'm not a $100 million company. Well, that's probably correct. But, you can't just wait forever to take steps towards what's going to happen. So that's where, if you talk about some of the biggest challenges, it is that mindset that does become a massive impediment to people. Because many people who are building a business really just want to have a job that they control, as opposed to having something that's scalable. And then when they get over that hump, then the challenge is going to often be those relationships that I talked about earlier, going back to, okay, now I need to figure out what my relationships are with my commercial parties, with my clients and customers,
My employees.
and with my employees and my partners who are part of the project I'm working on.
Yeah.
So I think when I do say that attitude relationships is the driver to success, I say that from experience, but it's also just if you analyze it and say, well, if you don't have that level of ambition, if you don't have that willingness to overcome the stage fright, if you don't have that willingness to iterate as you go, it's very difficult to figure out how you're going to succeed.
Yeah. It's really fascinating what you're sharing now. I really did not expect to hear so much sort of human psychology and so much focus on the, let's say, entrepreneurial journey. We didn't rehearse these answers, so even though my questions were prepared, of course. So you talked about exponential growth and the disruptive nature of Web3. Of course, you could put AI in the same category, and perhaps robotics and other sort of disruptive technologies. How difficult do you think it is to start a business in the Web3 space in 2025 versus, for example, 5 years ago?
Well, it's easier because there's certainly some level of acceptance that, when people say, okay, Web3, I have a general idea. Most people might say, I know what that seems like, or they've got more deep experience with Web 1 and 2. So there's that advantage of, it's not the same as, this great unknown. But it also has, with that, there's an incumbent challenge, which is competition, right? Because everybody wants to have, a Web3 business, and it gets kind of crowded. So part of it then becomes just having a much more laser focus on what's your unique proposition, what's your solution, what's your go-to-market strategy, what are you going to do to execute on it, and what are you going to do to, those risks that we've gone through, and there's many more we can review, but what are you going to do to actually have a genuine answer? We're going to think about that next year. Oh, we'll figure out what we're going to do with respect to our underlying agreements, or we'll figure out financing, or we'll figure out various issues later. That becomes a challenge because you don't have any credibility, if that's right, sort of mindset.
Very interesting.